Hey guys, this is notes number 5, solving by factoring. Here is your FLT. Go ahead and pause, write that down, and then press play when you're ready, okay? So here, given a quadratic equation, you're going to be able to solve it by factoring and applying the zero product property. We'll call that ZPP, okay? So a few things here. Notice how we're strictly only working with quadratic equations, okay? So quadratic equations are equations that have the highest degree of 2, so like an x squared, okay? So here we go. So first, the concept of zero product property, okay? Zero product property. Okay, so whenever you guys are learning anything in math, okay, and they present a rule or a theorem or some type of conjecture, there's a lot of logic behind it. So don't lose the meaning behind it. Don't think of it as just some magical rule that works. So I'm going to explain it to you so that you understand why this is a property here, okay? So imagine you had two different numbers here, okay? Something times something else. We call those factors, right? For instance, 4 times 5 is 20, right? 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Now, here's the thing. If I told you the answer was 0, okay? We're multiplying two numbers together, two factors, so we have a product that's equal to 0, right? If I told you that the first number was 3, can you guys tell me what that second number has to be, right? 3 times what gives me 0? So if the first number is 3, then the second one has to be 0, okay? Same idea, if the second number was 6 and the product is equal to 0, what does the first number have to be, right? It has to be 0. Okay. So the zero product property states that if you have a product, meaning if you have two things multiplied together and it's equal to 0, okay, and we'll just call this A and B, then either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. That's the logic behind it, okay? One of those factors have to come out to 0. Okay, hopefully that made logical sense and you're not just following a rule here. So let's try this one out and use what we've been learning here, okay? So look, here's example 1. Solve. Sometimes I'll say solve the equation. I'll just say solve for x. Okay, here's part A. Let's say you guys had x minus 6 times the quantity x minus 2 equal to 0. Okay, so take a look here. Do we have a product? We do. We have something times something else. Okay, now that something is a binomial, but it doesn't matter. It's the same logic. We have something times something else, and is it equal to 0? It is. So we have a product that's equal to 0. So what that tells me is either that first factor, x minus 6, is equal to 0, or that second factor, x minus 2, has to be 0. In order for this to be true, one of these factors have to come out to 0. So then you solve. So we go back to integrated 1 for a second. How do you isolate x, right? You perform the inverse operation. So minus 6, opposite of minus 6 is plus 6. And then what we do to one side, we do to the other to keep it balanced. X ends up equaling 0 plus 6 is 6. Keep the sign of the larger number. So x is either 6 or, if I go opposite here, the inverse operation is plus 2. X will equal a positive 2 here. Okay, so we have two solutions here. Okay, pretty easy. Here we go. I'm asking as if I'm going to get a response, but I'm trying to mimic as much as possible when we're in the classroom here, okay? Try this one out. The quantity x plus 4 times the quantity x minus 5 is equal to 0. Pause and play when you're ready. Okay, so I noticed that I have a product, something times something else, that's equal to 0. So I'm going to apply the 0 product property, which tells me that either of the two factors will equal 0. Okay, and when we solve, we should get negative 4 and positive 5. So it's either x equals negative 4 or x equals 5. Okay, now on the answers, you could probably write like negative 4 comma 5 on Delta Math, because sometimes they'll make you type it like that, okay? So either one will work. They might even give you like a little brace on the outside, not to confuse it for a point, because a point you use parentheses, okay? We'll do a couple more just to make sure you guys are comfortable. Here's part C. The quantity 2x plus 1, x minus 3 equal to 0. Pause and play when you're ready. Okay, so here we have a product, two factors multiplied, right, equal to 0. So I could apply the 0 product property. So that means either the first factor is equal to 0 or the second factor is equal to 0. Okay, I'll solve the second one first. Doesn't matter. So that comes out to positive 3. Or, now here I got to do a little bit of work. I'm going to subtract my 1. I go opposite of positive 1. Okay, so now 2x is equal to 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Keep the sign of the larger number. And I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2 to both sides. Since 2 is multiplying with x, you always want to perform the inverse operation here, okay? So here, x is equal to negative 1/2, or x is equal to positive 3. Okay. So there you have it, all right? When you have factors equal to 0, you just perform the 0 product property. Now, what if, example 2, all right? Now, we're not going to write the instructions. We'll just assume that it's solve for x again, or solve the equation. Now, what if you had something like this? Okay. Do you have a 0 product, right? Do you have two things multiplied together to equal 0? So if you notice, we don't have anything multiplied together here. We just have 3 separate terms. So the idea of connecting what we learned previously is, well, if you have a quadratic trinomial, okay, you guys know all the techniques here. You know how to factor so that it looks like a product. Okay, the right-hand side is already 0, so we're good with that. So here's to recap. This is where you want to factor by exhaustion, okay? You think of the factors of your first term, which is x times x, or 1x times 1x if you want. You think of your factors for 3, which is 1 times 3. And then you keep guessing and checking until you get your answer here. Everything seems to be positive in here, so I think I'll be safe with a plus and a plus. And I'll just put a 1 and a 3 there. Let me check real quick on this side, okay? Outside, 1 times x is 1x. Inside, 3 times x is 3x. If I add that, I get 4x, which is exactly what I want. So I know I'm good. But let me erase this so I have space. So I know that these two statements are equal. So now that I have a product that's equal to 0, I will apply the 0 product property. which means that each factor will equal to 0. Okay. And then you go ahead and you solve there, okay? We are going to use the inverse operation. X comes out to -3. We subtract 1 here. X comes out to -1. And again, if I'm moving a little bit too quickly, this is where you can always pause and replay or slow it down, right? So make sure that you're going at your own pace. Don't try to go at my pace here, okay? It'll take a lot of practice, but you'll eventually get there, if not already. Okay, let's try this one. Here's part B. Let's say we had 2x squared plus 5x plus 3 is equal to 0. All right. Pause here, try it out on your own. Go as far as you can. If you get stuck, that's all right. But go ahead and play when you're ready. Okay. So here I noticed that I have something equal to 0, which is good, but it's not a product. So I have to make it look like a product here. So that's going to require me to factor. All right. So the factors of 2x squared are going to be 2x times 1x, or 2x times x. And 3, the factors of 3 are just 1 and 3. All right. I always put in my first terms in first. Okay. And then this is where you guys kind of have to just guess. Remember, we're aiming for 5x. So I'm thinking maybe I'll put a +3 here and a +1 there. And again, if you're not sure, you guess and then you check. All right. So here we go. I'm not sure. I'm going to guess and check. The outside, 2x times 1 is just 2x. The inside is 3 times x, which is positive 3x. If I add that, I get positive 5x, which is exactly what I wanted right up here. Okay. Now, if you flip the 1 and the 3, you won't get 5x. You might actually get 7x there, okay? So you keep guessing and checking. That's probably the part that takes the longest, relatively. So just take your time with that. Okay, now that we have a 0 product property, I can set each factor equal to 0. And then we do the same thing here, okay? On the second equation here, since it's easier, I'll do that first. I'll perform the inverse operation. Opposite of +1 is -1. I do it to both sides. I come out with a -1. We keep the sign of the larger number. That's one of our solutions. And over here, I'm going to subtract 3. 2x will equal a -3. And I'm going to divide by 2. So x comes out to -3/2, or x equals -1. Okay? You can get fractions. It doesn't matter. Don't freak out if you do. There you go. All right. Here's one more for you guys to try. Here's part C. Let's do 4x squared plus 9x plus 5 equal to 0. Try that one there, and then play when you're ready. Okay, so here we want to factor first if we want to use the 0 product property. So here it's looking like the possible factors here are 4x and 1x, or 2x and 2x. Over here, there's only one possible factor, which is 1 and 5, okay? So I don't know what this is going to look like, but let me just start off, let's say, with 4x and 1x. I don't know if that's right, all right? And if I'm aiming for 9, I know if I put 5 here, my outer will be 20, so that's going to be too large. So maybe let's put 1 here and let's put 5 here. And since everything is positive, I'll just put same with positives, okay? So let's check. My outer will be 4x. My inner will be 5x, both positive. That gives me exactly what I want, okay? So again, when you guys do enough of these factoring problems, you'll start to think strategically about what works and what doesn't work without having to physically write things out, okay? Okay, so now that we have a product equal to 0, that implies that each factor will equal 0. Or I should say either of the two factors will equal 0. Okay, I subtract 1 here, I'll get -1. Or I'll subtract 5 here, I'll get 4x equals -5. And I'm moving a little bit quickly because this is like our third example, so I want to make sure I speed it up if you already know what's going on here, okay? But if you don't, no worries, just replay as much as you need to. This comes out to -5/4, or x equals -1. And once again, on Delta Math, they'll probably have you write it as -5/4, comma, -1, just for homework's sake, so just keep that in mind, okay? Okay, now, here's the thing. We started off with factors that are equal to 0, and then we came up with some scenarios where you had to factor first. What else could possibly be different, right? So here's example 3. So you guys are trying to pretty much cover every possible way so that you know how to handle all quadratic equations here, okay? So let's say you had, let's say we have 2x squared plus 5x plus 5 equals 2. Now, here's the number one mistake I see with kids, okay? Not to say that you guys are going to do it. Most students tend to jump into factoring right away. So remember, before you even factor, in order to get a 0 product property, you need to get a 0 first. Okay, if you guys take a look at the right-hand side of every equation, it was always equal to 0, right? Now, how would you use the 0 product property if it's not even a 0, right? So we're going to have to fix that. So what we do is, how do you make that a 0? We're going to take that 2 and we're going to bring it to the other side. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the inverse operation. So since that's a positive 2, I'm going to subtract 2 on one side and then subtract 2 on the other side. But there's 3 terms here, so I'm only going to subtract 2 where it belongs. Where can the -2 be, right? It can only subtract with the other constant. All right? So we'll have 2x squared plus the 5x, and positive 5 minus 2, it gives you 3. We keep the sign of the larger number. And the right-hand side, most people will cross it out, but what does that really mean, right? 2 minus 2 is 0. So sometimes you got to fix the right-hand side, okay, before you proceed. Now, this problem we just did in part B of example 1, so I'm just going to speed this one up here. So when we factor, that came out to 2x plus 1 plus 3 equal to 0. And then we solve 2x plus 3 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0, minus 3, minus 3. And again, I'm speeding through this because you guys did an almost identical problem earlier in example 2. Okay, so the big takeaway is this part right here. Okay, whenever you don't have one side equal to 0, you got to make it a 0, especially if you want to use the 0 product property. There's no such thing as a 2 product property, okay? Okay, let's try a couple more. Here's part B. Let's do this one. Let's do 2x squared plus 7x minus 1 equals -4. Okay, try this one out on your own. Pause, and if you get stuck, no worries, just press play. But see how far you can go first before you continue watching the video here, okay? Okay, so I noticed I have a quadratic equation, but one side is not equal to 0, so it's easiest to just move that -4 by performing the inverse operation on both sides. Okay, that'll make my right hand 0 because I'm trying to set it up for the zero product property here. -1 plus 4 is a positive 3. We have different signs, so we want to subtract and we want to keep the sign of the larger number. 2x squared and the 7x I'll just bring down. And then now that I have a quadratic equal to 0, I'm going to try to factor here. And if you factor and you manipulate it enough, you should get 2x and x and plus 3 over there and plus 1 with the 2x. Okay, I noticed that when I multiply the outer, I get 6x. The inner, I get 1x. So that gives me exactly what I want, the 7x right there. Okay, so I split, use the zero product property here. I set each factor equal to 0. And then eventually you guys get x equals -1/2. Now don't do this on your paper here, okay? I'm doing this to shorten the video as much as possible. Eventually you'll get this, okay? One or the other. All right. Now what this all means and the purpose of it, it's to help you guys sketch later, okay? It'll tell you exactly how the graph looks like without having to make a giant table of values, which you guys did back in IM1. Okay, so we're learning all these little techniques to help us sketch our graphs a little bit faster for later. All right. Okay, here's example. Let's do C, part C. Let's do let's do something like this one. X squared plus 8x equals -15. Now, side note, they might use a different variable, but don't let that throw you off, okay? We use x because it's probably the most popular variable in math, okay? Even though we use the entire alphabet. Okay, now this one is the same idea, but it kind of throws people off because they notice that there's kind of like a missing third term right there on the left-hand side, but it's the same idea. So here we go. First step, what do? We want to make one of our sides equal to 0, so it's easiest to move the -15 over. And what I do to one side, I do to the other. Now, keep in mind that 15 cannot add with the x squared. 15 cannot add with the 8x. 15 is kind of by its lonesome, so I squeeze it right there. Now, some people will do this and they'll confuse themselves, so just watch out for that. So I'll just put it right here, just so that I know it's not going to go with anything else. The right-hand side will now be 0, and I'll have x squared plus 8x plus 15. So not difficult. It's just some people tend to flip out when it doesn't look exactly the way that it should. So go ahead and finish this one here. Pause and play when you're ready. Okay, so here if you factor it down, you should get x plus 3 times x plus 5, or the other way around in this case, okay? Equal to 0, okay? Now that I have a product that's equal to 0, I'll apply the zero product property, ZPP, where it allows me to set each factor equal to 0, because logically, one of these have to come out to 0 in order to multiply out to 0. Okay, and eventually you should get x equals -3 or x equals -5 once you solve. But don't do this in your homework, okay? This is just to save time. All right, here's the last example. I think that was example 3, so I'll end it with example 4 here. Okay, so let's say we had something really gross like 5, let's see, maybe not 5. Let's do, okay, not as bad, but it serves the same concept. X squared plus 5x minus 35 equals 3x. Okay, pause, think about this real quick. What's different about this problem? Why did Mr. Lee create a different example for this one, right? Okay, so some of you hopefully may notice that there's a term over here that has a variable next to it. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. What's the name of this term? Okay, we know it's one term, so it's a monomial. What's the first name there? What do we call it? Pause and play when you're ready. This right there, since x has a degree of 1, we call that a linear term. Okay? It doesn't change anything at all, you guys. So our goal is to still make the right-hand side 0. Or actually, it's either side, but it's easier to move the 3x over. So what we're going to do is, how do I move a positive 3x over? I perform the inverse operation. So I'll subtract 3x. Now, if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other, but where would you guys subtract 3x, right? Linear terms will only go with linear terms, so I'm going to put it right here because they're both linear. I wouldn't put it right here or right here because they can't combine, right? So just keep that in mind. And that's it, okay? That's the only curveball. Now we have x squared. Down the middle here with the linear terms, different signs we subtract. We keep the sign of the larger number, so positive, and I bring down the minus 35, okay? And then you factor this one here. So here we go, x times x, 7 times 5. I see that my constant is a minus. Look back in your notes if you forgot, it's okay. But look back in the previous notes. What does it mean when your constant is negative? Pause and play when you're ready. That tells you that you're going to have different signs when you factor. Okay? When your constant is positive, you know you're going to have the same signs, okay? Now, since you have a negative 35, you're going to have to multiply to get a negative 35. So that means one of them has to be negative, one of them has to be positive. So I'll put in my first terms here. And I'll just guess. I'll put a 7 here and I'll put a 5 here. And let's say I wanted to do minus 7 plus 5, okay? So suppose I was just guessing, I'm not sure. Let's find out what happens. X times a positive 5 is a positive 5x. Negative 7 times x is a negative 7x. Different signs we subtract, and we keep the sign of the larger number. Does that match? It doesn't, right? So it's close, but the signs are off. So remember what I said, if the signs are off, but the value is the same, all you got to do is switch the signs. So here, maybe we should have positive 7 and then negative 5 here. All right. So let's check. Outer, negative 5x. Inner, positive 7x. That gives me a positive 2x. So we're good. It matches up here. All right. So we apply the zero product property. X plus 7 has to equal 0, or the x minus 5 factor has to equal 0. So then we solve, and eventually x will equal negative 7, or x will equal 5. Okay. Here's part B. Let's try this one here. You know what? Let this be the last one for the day, all right? Negative 4x squared minus 8x minus the 3 equals negative 3 minus 5x squared. Okay, so I'm trying to introduce you all the different types of ways that they could kind of throw you off. So the more you know, the better prepared you're going to be here, okay? All right, so let's take a look. What's different, right? We notice that the right-hand side has a lot of terms, right? Has a lot of terms. So, doesn't matter, okay? We're trying to make one side equal to 0. Now, You can make either side equal to 0, but in this case, it's easy to move the stuff from the right towards the left. So let's take care of one thing at a time. This minus 3 right here, I want to move it to the right side, okay? So I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 opposite, and I'm going to add 3 here because that's where it belongs, all right? And then this negative 5x squared, the opposite is going to be positive 5x squared, and I'm going to put it right here where the quadratic terms are. I wouldn't put it here because that's where the linear term is, all right? Okay, so the right-hand side, notice how everything goes away, so you're going to be left with a giant 0. Okay, now over here on the left, you're going to have 1x squared positive. I'll put it there for you guys. Okay, minus 8x. And I notice that minus 3 plus 3 is 0. Now, you can decide to put plus 0 or not. It doesn't matter. But I'm just going to leave it there. So, what's weird about this, right? So, I'm going to get rid of the 1 just so that it looks a little bit cleaner. How do you solve for this when there's no third term? Right? Pause there, think about it, play whenever you're ready. Think about what you would do. Okay, now ideally, you wouldn't want to exhaust because it's not so transparent in that sense. So you got to think of another way to factor. We learned 3 different ways here, right? So does this look like a difference of 2 squares? Not really, right? But we could always check to see if we want to factor by greatest common factor. It's been a while. Don't worry if you forgot, but that's what your notes are for. So we have 2 terms here. Do they both have anything in common? Okay. They both have something in common. They have an x in common. So I'm going to take that out. Now, if I take out an x, right? If I had 2 and I took out 1, I'm going to have 1 left. Okay, minus. And if I take out an x from 8x, I will only have an 8 left. Okay, if you guys are ever unsure if you're right, if you distribute this, you should get x squared minus 8x again. And if you don't, that means you probably did something wrong. Okay? Okay, so here's my question to you. Think about this very carefully. Do I have a 0 product property? Pause and play when you're ready. We do have a 0 product property here. It doesn't look like what we're normally used to, which is something like this, right? But we still have something times something else, right? Isn't there like a little multiplication symbol right here? Okay, so don't be confused by that. So here we go. We can still use the 0 product property because we have a product, although not the most popular type. It is still a product that's equal to 0. So I like to just draw the line where it separates the 2 factors here, okay? So x will equal 0, or the x minus 8 factor will equal 0. Now this one is already solved, so x is equal to 0. And over here, eventually you'll get x equals 8. So you still get 2 solutions here. All right. That's pretty much it. Okay. So before you guys close out this video, some things to note for your Delta Math. Okay. So for Delta Math, the first 2 sets of problems, they're just asking you to get 0 on the right-hand side, okay? So they're just asking you to move some things around so that it's set up for a 0, okay? But the first 2 doesn't require you to solve, all right? And then, let me double check here. And then the 3rd and 4th task, you'll be solving the same way. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The first 2, you're just setting it up. Okay, 3 and 4, you're actually solving there, all right? But if you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully that was thorough enough for you guys. And again, the purpose of knowing how to do this is to help us sketch later on, okay? That's it.